So, Brad, for 30 days on Kickstarter, I'm screaming from the heavens, oh, hey, back my book everywhere, huh? It's social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, my sites, Discord, all sorts of forums and channels and mediums. Everybody, I got a Kickstarter going on. Hey, Kickstarter.
You're saying the word Kickstarter so much that you're actually sick of your own voice saying those syllables.
To the point where it's lost all meaning. It's like when you genuinely try to think of how the word knife is spelled. You're like, none of this makes sense, that kind of thing. I'm saying Kickstarter so much that I'm driving myself bonkers. And then the Kickstarter ends, everything's fine. And Brad, we've talked about this before, but I swear to God, Brad, 15 minutes after the Kickstarter ends, I get an email. Oh, how did I miss it? When did the Kickstarter end? I was like, for 30 days, I've been screaming from the rooftop for 30 days. And then 15 minutes after it ends, hey, Dave, just noticed the Kickstarter ended. Brad, I wanted to put my fist through a wall. You're like, well, what does it take? I honestly, God, because this, I've done, I don't even know, 9 Kickstarters now, and you've done your fair share of Kickstarters too. You know that no matter what you do, this happens every time. You scream from the rooftops, hey, over here, bang, 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 bang on a drum. And then as soon as the Kickstarter ends, someone comes out of the woodwork. But I honestly, Brad, I kind of want to email her back and be like, what could I have done differently? Because I genuinely want to learn. How could I have gotten you to move within that 30-day period of me screaming it everywhere, literally everywhere that I have access to online?
Oh, well, I think the answer is there's nothing you could do because it really isn't about you. It's about the same thing that makes a Kickstarter skyrocket in the last day of the campaign. And that's everybody puts all this stuff off to the last minute. And in some cases, maybe it's because, payday isn't here yet and you're budgeting things out. I get that. But in many cases, it's just people put things off to the last possible minute. And then something comes up and they get distracted and they miss it. But we've all seen that. Your Kickstarter goes nuts in the last day because it's gotten down to this is it. Now there's a time period and then it's going to be gone. And that's what drives those last minute sales. And this person was just on the wrong end of that. So I don't think there's anything you could do except, I'm going to say it again, Backer Kit. That's the whole reason that I run Backer Kit on these campaigns is because when that happens, and it happens every time, you shoot that person an email and you say, hey, no problem. Here's how you do it. I've got the pre-order store all set up. Go and make your purchase. Are you not running Backer Kit on this one?
No, I'm not. I tend to run Backer Kit on my bigger campaigns, the drive campaigns, because those go north of 100,000, whereas this one was ended up being 38. And it was back of envelope math, but my math was like, well, I don't know that it's worth the time and trouble to set this up for a $38,000 campaign because Backer Kit has that flat $200 fee. It's 2% of campaign funds, and then 5% of funds raised in the Backer Kit campaign. Or you can do flat $200 fee, 3% of campaign funds, plus 0% of funds raised in Backer Kit. And something about, and again, back of envelope math, someone can correct me, but I just felt like it was worth doing it for the drive campaigns, not as worth doing it for my smaller campaign, which would probably only have generated $1,000, $2,000 in Kickstarter, but then also would have taken out 2% of the campaign funds, 5% of the funds raised in Backer Kit, and a flat $200 fee, So to answer your I don't know if you asked me a question or not there, but yes, no, I'm not using Backer Kit on this one. And it was mainly because the math didn't feel as strong to me as it would have been for one of my bigger campaigns.
Yeah. Now, does that affect how you set up the original Kickstarter campaign itself? Because I know when I'm working on building one that I'm going to put on hold till the next turnaround of the year. And let's remember, we got some good news to share about that as well. But in terms of my Kickstarter, instead of building all these packages where I say, okay, you can get this book and you can get this book and this, and you can get this book. Using Backer Kit allowed me to do a much more streamlined campaign. And then I just say in the campaign text, if you want to add on any of my books and help the pledge along, here's how you do it. You add extra money. You've got a credit to your account. So I don't have to put all of those other books in my campaign pledges for Kickstarter. That's another benefit. Do you find that helps you streamline? Or in this case, was that not something that you were worried about?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you're smart that if you're going to be using BackerKit, that's the way to do it. Like you keep your level simple, like Brad, and then you have, hey, here's easy ways to add on. In my case, what Beth and I tried to do in crafting this Kickstarter was designing, I think roughly, let's just say 10, maybe 12 tiers that have different kinds of rewards for different kinds of people. Like, I'm the original art collector. All right, well, here's the one specifically for you. I'm a book collector. Okay, well, here's for you. I'm a tchotchke collector. I like all the physical stuff.
Right.
And so they crafted it like that. And we get a lot of emails during the campaign like, hey, will this be on BackerKit? Because people want everything that's in tier number 6, but there's one item in tier 7 that they would love to get. And I just say, like, no, you're going to have to get tier 7. That's the way to do it. And that's fine. It all works out fine. The bigger kicker for this one was shipping internationally, which is just getting more and more expensive.
Yeah.
I can feel my international readers going, oh, hey, I can, like, Brad, imagine their hand, like, hovering over their mouth, like, I'm ready to back. Here I go. Oh, I'm so excited. I love Dave's work. It brings me genuine joy. And, oh, God, that's the shipping to Australia? No, I am not backing this book.
Meanwhile, somewhere in Germany, I think I will have this anatomy of the authors. Oh, Gott in Himmel.
That, ladies and gentlemen, Brad's German. That was fantastic. That brought me joy. What was that? That was great.
I brought it home with that Gott in Himmel thing.
So I wanted to mention one thing before we intro the show, which is that I realized that I sounded like I was being dismissive about, like, oh, I hate having to scream about Kickstarter for 30 days in a row from all social media, because you a little bit start to feel like I hate myself. I'm talking about this nonstop, but it's something that I would like to reinforce to all of our readers, which is, you know what I hate even more than self-promotion, Brad?
What do you hate even more than self-promotion?
Is not having a career. That's what I hate more than that.
You ain't wrong, buddy.
I really like being able to pay my mortgage and be able to cartoon for a living. So that's a lovely way to get over self-promotion.
Yeah, and if it means that somebody's got to scroll past Twitter and see an extra Kickstarter tweet from you, that's an okay thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to cry into my soup about it, because only twice a year do I kickstart, and so I'm sorry, Susan and Barry and Greg, if there's one extra tweet that you don't want to read. But it's the balancing act of, like, because I see it again and again from artists. They mention the Kickstarter once when it launches and once when it's finishing. It's like, well, there's a reason why the Kickstarter ended up where it did, and that is you've got to be out there banging the drum about how worthwhile your art is, and having belief in it. And so anyway, that's that, Brad. That's that.
Well, no, we got to take a quick pause. Since you mentioned international shipping, let's take a quick pause for a news update, because a show, or maybe 2 shows ago, we talked about the United States Postal Service pulling out of the Global Postal Union. And I guess there were some last-minute negotiations. The upshot is the USPS is staying in the Global Postal Union, and that is good news for people doing shipping from overseas to the U.S., as well as people shipping in the U.S. to overseas. It's just good news all around, so we wanted to pass that along to you.
The news headline there is Bull quietly exits China shop. That's what the headline is.
Yes, and only a few fragile, shattered nerves were left in the wake.
Yeah, exactly. Very nervous shopkeeper eyes Bull as it walks out of China shop. So, on that note, I am going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is brought to you by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. So the Kickstarter is behind us. The Comic Lab pins are available. Just a reminder, they are over at Brad's site and over at my site, sheldonstore.com. And Brad, forgive me, I've forgotten the URL specifically for your site.
NewEvilBook.com.
That's right, NewEvilBook.com. Brad, that's my bad as a friend. I apologize about that.
That's quite all right.
But don't forget, you can get both pins as a Patreon backer if you go to Patreon. Get the secret link, and you can get both of them for $10. So that's that, my friend.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited to get these pins out. And you I don't know how much we talked about this last show, but the Comic Lab logo pin, that was something Dave did as a personal kindness to me, because even though the standing rule is, nobody wants your logo, I love that logo so much, and it's because I didn't design it. And I love that logo so much. And I wanted those pins in the world so I could have some. My kids are wearing them to school. Their friends are already asking about them. Got to tell you about that. The kids are asking about it.
You're sounding like a bad salesman right now. You're like, it's generating friendships. Oh, people's lives are being changed by this pin.
No. Alex's friends are all asking about it already at their high schoolers. So I got a feeling that I'm really hopeful about these. I'm hoping this is going to be the exception that proves the rule. But I love that Comic Lab logo pin so much. I can't even tell you.
It did come out awesome. And I've made maybe 10 pins now, and I think this is the first time that I've used silver as the metal. And no, I don't think that's true. Anyway, regardless, it looks great against colors, the Comic Lab colors, so that's very cool.
Yeah, and I'm using it as a tie tack when I teach college now, so that's an added benefit.
Cute.
Yeah, it's
that's a great
super
idea.
Cool.
Oh, very cool. Well, Brad, let's jump right into this week's first $5 question coming in over at patreon.com/comiclab. And the question is this. Dave and Brad, I know a lot of comic creators use Kickstarter, Dave Kellett included, as their primary means of crowdfunding for their books and projects. With Kickstarter now apparently firing employees who try to unionize, do you think this will become an issue for not only creators, but also for fans, since comic fans tend to be very socially conscious? If so, where do you see creators turning to as a Kickstarter replacement? Brad, this is like 3 good questions wrapped up into one. And it's frankly something we've been wanting to talk about for the last week, because it's been generating a lot of emails and tweets to us. So, Brad, what are your thoughts? Kickstarter made, frankly, a boneheaded move and tried to shut down a unionization drive.
It made a bad move and made a bad move after that, and made a number of PR nightmare blunders to follow it up. It's just been a snowball of horrible decision-making from my armchair view. And there's so much to unpack here. So first I got to start here about the union issue in general. You guys, you folks have heard me talk about union stuff in the past, because every newspaper I worked for upwards of 20 years as I had day jobs, every newspaper was a union paper. And at every union paper that I worked, my pay, my benefits, my working conditions, everything was better than friends of mine who were working the same jobs at other non-union papers. In other words, unions were very, very good to me. So I cannot blame Kickstarter employees for wanting to unionize. Unions, by and large, are very, very good for workers, and they're not in an unfair way. I don't think it's a way for all the workers get together and say, "Hey, we're providing the thing that makes this company work. We're providing the labor. We're making things happen. We'd like to have some say in how we get paid, how those working conditions are met." And the nice thing, I think, about a union is that the owner sits down, does one negotiation, and that floats for everybody. Now you've got a contract, and that applies equally across the board. I don't see where this is a problem. But then again, like I said, I was always on a side that I benefited a lot from that. So I can't blame Kickstarter employees from wanting to form a union. And I would be a big hypocrite if I said that I wasn't going to support that. That would be very hypocritical of me. So So it has me keeping a very, very cautious eye on all of this as it develops. Now, a lot of people are immediately going to this whole idea of a Kickstarter boycott. And I, even as a really, really strong union supporter, I want to caution you against that for the main reason that the people who are trying to organize that Kickstarter are not calling for a boycott. Not yet, at least.
Yep.
And if you start boycotting early, you basically put a weapon in the hands of management that says, listen, they're not even unionized. Already it's causing problems. Already our numbers are dropping. This is going bad. That's going bad. You give them a cudgel to use against the organizers. So anybody who's thinking about boycotting Kickstarter, follow the union's request, I would say, and hold off. Hold off. Nobody's asking for a boycott just yet.
Yeah, it's basically a big cannon shot, don't you think, Brad? You want to save that one for when things go really south. Yeah.
So listen, and that's the whole thing that makes unions work. By the way, it's the same psychology that makes a web ring work. That's the same psychology that makes an online collective work. It's focusing all of your efforts to one goal in a concerted way. And so, yeah, hold off on that. Now, there's a bigger question to that. And that is, what happens? In other words, are you, Dave Kellett, starting to look for replacements for Kickstarter? Does this have you kind of like, maybe I better come up with a background plan?
The answer is yes. I mean, the truth of it is that all artists, I don't want to say all artists, but I would say a vast majority of us, Brad, are pro-labor, because you'd be kind of a dummy to be like, no, unions are bad. In the sense that, like, you look at the American workplace, Brad, the 8-hour workday, the 40-hour work week, the weekend, healthcare benefits, OSHA being established as the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Right.
All the sort of state and governmental things that we frankly take for granted came about in early 20th century union movements. And so you'd be a dummy as an artist to be like, what, Google doesn't have a union, so therefore the world in this. I mean, frankly, a lot of the ways that corporations have slipped in the latter part of the 20th century is because unions have a little bit lost their punch. And so all of the tech companies got started without unions. And so there's a reason why Larry Ellison and Larry Page and Elon Musk and Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates came out billionaires, but their average employee is like, well, wait a minute, I whatever the union complaint might be. And like, as certain tech companies don't realize their stock options for the average employee, they'll realize, oh, wait, maybe I got the short end of the stick here in terms of where things netted out. Anyway, long story short is most every artist would agree that unions net benefit for the U.S. in the 20th century, right? Yeah. And frankly, for world working conditions. But we also are in this moment respecting that the people trying to organize the proto-union in this case have not called for a boycott yet, and that's key. Mm-hmm. And we also know that there's not a lot of other good options. Indiegogo is kind of like the one-tooth cousin of Kickstarter that's over there going, you could use Indiegogo. We got one wheel on the truck, and we're ready to help you kickstart your product. I mean, Indiegogo your product.
Hey, but listen. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. I'm just saying, like, we are very. So what I'm saying is, when you ask Dave, are you looking around? I'm actively looking around, as is every other cartoonist. There's not a lot of other good options. What is probably going to happen is this is a slow rolling PR nightmare for Kickstarter, and I'm sure that they realize this. I guarantee you, what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months is their board is going to meet. They're going to force changes on the leadership, and they're going to say, let this happen. Because, Brad, the other thing we haven't mentioned yet is that Kickstarter didn't file as a normal corporation. They filed as a benefit corporation.
Yes. That's a really important part of this story.
They filed as a benefit corporation, and then they're against a union forming. It's like, what the hell are you guys doing? The whole idea, for those not familiar, is that a benefit corporation normally, in most U.S. history, the one goal of a corporation was to produce value for their shareholders, right? Like, that's above anything else. It's like, F everything else, F the environment, F workers. Our one goal is to produce profit. And that's amazing in a capitalist sense. Like, that's just like go. But it also produces a lot of losers in that system, right? And so a benefit corporation says, well, wait a minute. No, we're also going to take into account our neighborhood, our employees, our environment, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think there's like 25, maybe 26 states in the U.S. that allow a company to form as a benefit corporation. And New York with Kickstarter was one of them.
Yeah.
And so they filed as a benefit corporation, and then they're like, no unions. And so what are you doing there? What kind of message are you sending? I don't know what that is.
It's tone deaf. Meanwhile, and I know probably all of the top executives at Patreon listen to this show. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna take a minute and whisper in their little shell-like ears. Listen, you folks have been looking for a pivot for the last several months, right? There was membership for merchandise. There's Patreon loans. There's this and that. Patreon is in a unique position, in my opinion. And what do I know? But this is my opinion. I would think that Patreon would be in a unique position to capitalize on this. They've got all the infrastructure all set up. If they unveiled tomorrow their equivalent for Kickstarter, and they took a pro-worker stance at the same time, if they did those two things, everybody who's concerned about this, everybody who's worked up about this, switches to Patreon's crowdfunding service for products immediately. And they strike a huge blow to their number one competitor on the marketplace. Patreon's in a fantastic position to pivot, and I'm really champing at the bit to see if they're going to take the opportunity.
Brad, you're a genius. I genuinely did not think about that
Really?
Patreon could absolutely... No. And it speaks to my stupidity compared to yours, is that Kickstarter tried to create a drip. Do you remember when they tried to do drip, Brad, which was their venereal disease version of Patreon? And I only say VD because that name is terrible. Drip. Why would you call it drip?
Who would
there's
call
a million
it drip?
names that are better than drip.
Why would you spend a minute trademarking drip?
That's really like one step away from uncomfortable itch. Like why would you go with the name drip?
Uncomfortable itch has a better logo opportunity though. But anyway,
scratch that uncomfortable itch. But no, you're right. Patreon could absolutely take advantage of this in the way that Kickstarter at least tried to take advantage of Patreon's earlier stumbles with drip.
Absolutely.
And you're right. The user base is there. The basic infrastructure is not so hugely different from Patreon that it would be impossible to set up. I mean, it would take, a not insignificant amount of coding, but they could do it. It's certainly better than their merch for membership move and their loan move, which was really stupid.
And all of the important stuff is already there in terms of handling international payments, all of that kind of stuff, handling credit cards, all of that complicated stuff. And I'm not saying coding isn't complicated, but all of that financial stuff and the tax, whatever they have to do with value-added tax in the European Union, all of that stuff is there. And all they've got to do is unveil a version of Kickstarter, which I would imagine they could do relatively quickly, put a name on it that's better than drip, and they put a huge nail in the coffin of their number one competitor. It's hanging there waiting to happen.
Yeah, you're very smart, Brad. I genuinely did not think of that, and that really is a great idea on Patreon, or would be a great idea for Patreon's part to take advantage of this moment.
And now I have a better name for it than drip.
What's that?
We'll just call it Patreon. Brad's good idea.
I liked how you became school marmy. Patreon. Brad's good idea. A is for Apple. Brad's good idea.
Now step to the front of the class.
No, you know what you call it? You could call it something like Patreon Projects or something like that.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, Patreon Projects is actually very good.
Here's the thing is Patreon has the two key ingredients you need to start a distributed fundraising project system, which is access to a bunch of emails via their users, via their creators, and access to the creators. Like we already all know and use Patreon both on the creator side and the user side. So anyway, but to get back to Kickstarter, I really honestly do feel like this is a slow-rolling nightmare for them. They are going to fix this. And I think the board is going to be... remember that in most U.S. corporations, shareholders and the public can absolutely make it uncomfortable for a board to not act. And so reaching out to Kickstarter at this point is probably the greatest way you can do it, since we're not going to be boycotting. At least now, the Proto Union reminder has asked people not boycott Kickstarter. But the better way probably is to reach out and to let all of Kickstarter's contacts know, hey, I would really appreciate working with a company that's pro labor and pro worker.
Right.
And to go from there. And listen, before we make it all Pollyanna-ish, both Brad and I would admit that unions, like homeowners organizations, or like a school board, or like any other group of humans getting together, there's always going to be corruption. There's problems. It slows things down. Yep. But what we're arguing for a union is that on the arc of human history in the 20th century, they have been net value to workers in the U.S. and around the world. And also, regardless of that, if the workers want to unionize, it doesn't mean squat what Brad and I or you think about the unions. They should be allowed to unionize, and that's the short version of it.
If that's what they want, absolutely.
Right, if that's what they want, yeah. As far as self-determination, they should be allowed to figure out what they want to do. So that's our take on that. Shall we move on to the next question, Brad?
Absolutely.
So this question, it comes in from Susan Marks, and she says, Dave and Brad, love you both. This question is for Nosh's dad. I guess that's me.
Nosh's dad.
That's pretty cute. I like that. So you woke up one morning with the whole drive of arc, how I wish I'd wake up with an entire story arc. And I hear how more often than not that you and Beth are frantic at the end of the week to finish the strip. So how much do you write out in advance for each week or each post or episode? So this is a great question from Susan because there are two competing ideas here. One is that, yes, I do have the full arc for Drive planned out already. And thankfully I did when I started the story. But I don't have individual strips ready to go, right, Brad? And so you, Brad, once came up with a beautiful metaphor that I really like, that I'd love for you to repeat. It's a visual metaphor. Do you mind repeating that for everybody?
Well, yeah. When we were talking about storytelling a while ago, I said, think of it as a trip from Philadelphia to Chicago. You've got to get from Philly to Chicago. Now, obviously you're going to go in a general direction, and you're going to probably take a couple of interstates that are key. But there are probably 354 different ways, 354 different routes that you can take that can get you from Philadelphia to Chicago. Some of them are going to take longer. Some are going to take shorter. But what your job as a storyteller is to find the one that's most interesting. The most interesting route between Chicago and Philadelphia is the one that you want to search for. So you know the general direction you're going, and you know the road that you're on right now, but the turn that's coming up, not so much. It's going to be which is the more interesting turn. And as long as you're still driving towards Chicago and you still know the main arteries that you're going to hit and the main themes that your story is going to hit, you're gonna create a good story. You don't have to know what's happening 10, 20 miles up the road, but you do have to know what's coming up on this next hairpin turn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a great metaphor for a lot of reasons, because just like planning out a trip, you're like, I got to go from Philadelphia to Chicago. And then you go, well, what are the major cities I want to hit along the way, right? So then, just like in a story, you go, what are the major plot points I want to hit? And then you noodle down to smaller and smaller towns. And then literally the day of, you say like, yeah, I would like to hit up that ice cream place on this road trip to Chicago.
Exactly.
You know? And so, but you don't go in your living room in Philadelphia. You don't go on day 17 at 3:30. I want to hit up that ice cream place, and I don't even know where it is or if it exists yet. But we're going to hit an ice cream place,
right?
But so that's what tends to happen with Drive, is that I know the big picture, I know the medium-sized picture, and I know most of the major plot points that I want to hit along the way, and I know what's coming up, broadly speaking. But week in, week out, and day in, day out, in terms of what I'm writing, it's I'm coming up with that plot moment, that dialogue right there on the spot, in the same way that you are turning the wheel to take a right turn right there on the spot. You're not planning that weeks in advance.
Right. Yeah, and it's okay, it's okay to have a vague outline. It's okay to have, kind of plot ideas that are down the road. But really, like when I'm writing Evil Inc., it's what I'm really writing is for the next week or the next 2 weeks. I know certain broad things are going to happen, but how it's going to happen, a lot of times I'm writing that the week or two before, which, by the way, isn't always the best way to do it, because like I'll tell you, at at any time, the more time you can put between your ideation and your writing and a little bit of editing and a little bit of time to let that idea mature and come back with it with clean eyes. That's something that's also very important, but I'd be lying if I told you that I achieved it on a consistent basis all the time. There are times that I'm scrambling that thing out the week before it's due, So there's also practicality that you have to put in there as well.
Well, I want to echo what Brad just said in that Susan mentioned that Beth and I are frantically finishing up every week on Friday at 5 o'clock with Drive.
Yeah.
And part of that, as what Brad just said, the deadline is actually key to changing me from being, I want a perfect version of Drive to, I want a good version of Drive.
Right.
And that's okay. That's part of the creative process. Because that old saying of perfect is the enemy of good.
Right.
Like in my mind, I have this idealized version of how the story could go, Brad. And it's flowers and the drawing is perfect and the writing is spot on and everyone is, but sometimes only a deadline can get you to go, you got to get this done, champ, or you're not going to get anything done,
Yeah, I tell that to my storytelling students all the time. Perfect is the enemy of done. You can, you can work on this all day long, but I at some point you got to be done,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of a version, Brad, wouldn't you say, of what we were talking about last week with the guy who spent 2 years and hasn't done a page yet?
Yeah.
Is that at some point, to quote my grandfather, you either have to shit or get off the pot. You can't, you have to allow the deadline to make the editorial decision of being like, good enough. This is what we're doing. We're doing this because it's due right now.
I can't tell you how useful that 20 years of working in newspapers is to that. I'd made those decisions on a nightly basis for 20 years where it's like, you know what? The clock is ticking. We got to get this thing out of here. And then this is where it's going to be, that it's out. It's done. Next.
Yeah. And if you think that Charles Dickens or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or any of those people that were writing their stories, in sequences, didn't have that same deadline, there's a reason why some chapters or some sections of Hounds of the Baskervilles reads beautiful, and some you're like, man, Arthur Conan Doyle's really rushing through this part. I guess it was a deadline. So it is the nature of art is that deadlines are actually a critical part of the process in terms of forcing you to get done what your heart knows needs to get done, but wants to be perfect. So, Susan, to answer that question, the reason why Friday at 5 p.m. we're always cranking it out is because I've been percolating on what I've been writing or what I want to write. And there's an idealized Socratic ideal version in my mind. It's never going to happen. So I just have to eventually go, all right, this is it. This is it for the week. I'm drawing this. I'm writing this. And that's how we end up. And I'm sure the same thing happens with Brad. Wouldn't you say, Brad?
Well, yeah. In fact, just as we bring this topic to a close, because I know as we're talking about this, I'm just going to answer the tweet that we're going to get. In other words, well, Brad, you say that deadlines don't matter and you shouldn't hold yourself to a deadline and all that other stuff. And all of that is true. In other words, yes, I hold myself to a deadline, but there are certain times when that I don't. In other words, last week I didn't update an Evil Ink. By the way, I didn't go out and make an announcement that I was not updating Evil Ink because my readers have so much content they didn't even notice. Why would I bring their attention to it? And I'm taking this week off because I came to an end of a chapter. I want to take some time to plot out what's happening in the next phase. I'm following kind of a hero's journey thing. So I want to take a look at how those guideposts can direct the next phase of what I'm writing. And I want to take a little bit of time, think it through. I gave myself a 2-week hiatus without even announcing it. And everything is going to be just fine. There's going to be lots of readers when I come back. Everything's going to pick up right where it left off. I'm not making myself a slave to that deadline. Now, once I start going again, and once I start cranking, it will be my goal and my duty to myself to make sure that I'm hitting those updates and posting according to my preconceived schedule. But it's also not something that isn't something that I can do a manual override on and say, well, hold on, I'm at the end of a chapter. I'm going to take a couple weeks and now really plan out what I'm going to do next, because deadlines, although they're important, they're also not the boss of me, for lack of a better word.
I like that idea of Brad in his studio. You're not the boss of me.
You're not the boss of me, Deadline.
You're not going to tell me what to do. Just crying in a corner. You're not going to tell me what to do.
I can do this on my own. I don't need you. Weep, 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 weep.
I like the idea that the little pig going off like a Warner Brothers pig running off into the distance. Squeak, 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 squeak. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we'll tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Oh, when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, no worries.
You can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Leave us a 5-star and a few kind words.
That, and along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, let's talk comics. Well, just a reminder, gang, that this week's show and all of the shows through 2019 are sponsored by the good folks at Wacom over at WACOM, maker of Cintiqs and Intuos products. Brad has 2 of them in the studio, and I have 3, so this is a super appropriate sponsor of Comic Lab, as Wacom is literally what powers Brad making Evil Inc. and myself making Drive over at evil-comic.com and drivecomic.com. So we are super thankful to them for sponsoring the show for the rest of the year, and you can go check them out at WACOM.com. And Bradley J. Geiger, shall I jump into the next question for us, my friend?
Yeah. Well, listen, we need to talk about this. Hey, is this kind of like now I've got to keep up with you? You know, Brad has 2, I've got 3. Does that mean if I get 3, you're going to have 4?
It is what that's mean. It's a keeping up with the Joneses type thing.
It's like an arms race over here, and I've only got 2 arms. I can only draw so much.
This is having the 3rd Cintiq, Brad, is like a sign of middle age getting a convertible. I'm like, no, I need 4. I need 5.
Your
5 Cintiqs.
Your 3rd Cintiq is red with chrome finish.
It has a top that can drop down. Exactly. It's really nice.
I wondered about that because there was a button on the side and I hit it and it went do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And I'm like, what is that?
Yeah. So as soon as you get that next Cintiq, I am going to have to go out and get another one. So I'm going to have to go up to 4.
Yeah,
so yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you get next.
Well, thank you for embarrassing me publicly. I appreciate that in our friendship. So this question goes out. It's from Yana, and Yana asks, "Hey, Dave and Brad, I just finished listening to your 135 show, which was really interesting and insightful. During the episode, you spent a bit of time talking about what to do with your considerable archives, and I was wondering if you guys have ever looked at selling your comics through Amazon Kindle via Comixology Submit. I've listened in the past to an audiobook by some indie authors called Write, Publish, Repeat, and their sales are basically all ebooks. I think the Comixology website leaves a lot to be desired, but getting into the Amazon This Customer Also Bought listings and having both services sell your next book in the series at the end of the book seems like attractive offerings to me. Love to hear your thoughts." So, Brad, I feel like you are better suited to answer this one off the bat, if you don't mind me throwing you under the bus. What are your thoughts about Comixology and jumping into the Amazon system and ecosystem? Jumping into the Amazon ecosystem. I got there. Woo.
Yeah, you got there. It took you a little while. The Amazon ecosystem for ebooks, right? I get what you're doing there.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Geiger. Brad Geiger getting us there.
Very good. You haven't used that one in a while.
I have not.
So I've had a lot of experience with both of those things, Comixology and Amazon Kindle Direct. And I'm not really crazy about either one of them. Comixology, the interface is really difficult to upload a new book. And they are I find a lot of my books gets bounced back because of these weird kind of like, well, it doesn't ascribe to this rule, or it doesn't, like in terms of like a number of pixels for margins and stuff like this. And I'm getting a lot of books denied because of stuff that I just don't think. I'm all for quality control, but they seemed that like they were taking it to a point that was, for me to fix my books to fit what they considered to be their template, for the amount of money that I was getting back, which is another important consideration here, which was almost negligible. For the amount of money, the return on investment for me to go through and fit what Comixology wanted, it was just too much. It was a lot of work, and it was pennies in terms of what I was making. So I had a bunch of my early stuff put out there. I could not justify any further because I wasn't making squat. And Amazon Kindle publishing, their direct publishing through Kindle, now they will allow you to put a regular PDF up. And all my stuff is PDFs because, I mean, that's what an ebook basically is in a market dominated by the iPad. It's going to be the PDF. Right. For a Kindle, they prefer an EPUB file that is formatted for their Kindle reader. And again, doing all of that work to reformat these things that I have already set up for PDFs. I've got them in InDesign documents. I've tried a number of different ways that are supposed to they're supposed to plug and play, and you're supposed to just be able to spit out this perfect EPUB. None of them have worked. And none of them have, and maybe I just haven't figured out how to make them work. That is a possibility. I'm not the end-all be-all when it comes to these issues. But for me, I wasn't able to make them work. And again, I wasn't making squat on any of this stuff that in terms of significant money. It wasn't worth the amount of time that I was putting in on it. But I'm a huge, huge fan of e-comics. And that's because I don't use either one of those. I use Gumroad, which has been it's amazingly easy to put up a new book, and in terms of their sales interface. When you put a book up, it becomes super easy for your people on your website to buy that book and to get that book. And by the way, not for nothing, you can very easily set up a discount code and then give that ebook to your Patreon backers at a 100% discount. Serve them a little bonus reward, which is always nice, which is, by the way, something I just did last week, and I did it within 10 minutes tops. I had that thing up, served to my readers, discount code, boom, everybody's downloading it who wants it. And the return on investment is favorable because the money I'm making, it makes the little bit amount of time that I'm putting into that worthwhile. And then that's going to go out and also be something that I can incorporate into Kickstarters very easily, and Patreon, like I said. So I use Gumroad. I strongly, strongly suggest Gumroad. And I use another one that may be a little bit because of my circumstances. I'm a huge fan of a site called DriveThruComics. Through is spelled THRU. So it's DriveThruComics.com. Yeah. And they, by the way, allow not safe for work comics. And as you might be not so surprised to find out, that means that I can put my After Dark stuff up there, my Courting Disaster stuff, my sketchbooks. I can put all of that on DriveThruComics. They handle not safe for work material, and my stuff does. And again, their interface isn't quite as good as Gumroad, but it's way better than Comixology or Amazon ever came close to being. And I can upload my stuff in slightly longer than it took on Gumroad, and I can be for sale up there, and I get really great return on investment at DriveThruComics. So the answer to my question, or the answer to your question, so the answer to my question is, what have I said here? So the answer to your question is, yeah, I'm a big proponent of e-comics. I've not found any usefulness in being involved with either Comixology or Amazon Direct. What do you think, Dave?
Well, chiming in on Comixology first, I have to say that I have not used it, but I am surprised to hear your reaction that the interface is miserable, and I'll tell you why. Beth and I have started uploading my physical books into Amazon's system for me to sell through Amazon using Amazon Advantage. And I have to say, and maybe I've mentioned this on the show, I was amazed, literally dumbstruck at how this Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company has such a terrible back end. Like, it was so clearly designed by engineers for engineers with no thought about how a third party would use it. And the upload features are terrible. It's kind of like using a site from 1999 that was designed just for engineers, you know?
It's horrible.
It's really weird that a company that big. I mean, it begs two questions. One, do they not want to encourage individuals to upload through Amazon, which I suspect would not be the case. I would think that they would want that, but maybe they don't. And then the other thing is, what does that say about their margins that with that kind of stuff, that they're not making it pretty? You know what I mean? Like, it's maybe even for them, it's not a big aspect of their business. So they're like, we'll get to that someday. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, however, like Brad, I also sell ebooks. I sell them through Gumroad and through my own website store, sheldonstore.com. There's an entire section that says just ebooks. And I use Shopify's system for selling ebooks there. It's very convenient, very easy. But I use both Gumroad and Shopify. And I mean, I guess I would be open to, like Brad, open to using Comixology or an Amazon system. I just have found that it's not worth the trouble per se, because it's already not a huge money spinner for me, even through Shopify or Gumroad, I'll be honest.
Right.
And so to then go through and to redo my 15 books through EPUB and making sure that it meets whatever weird standard they have for EPUB. I haven't been enticed yet, if that makes sense. That's that. But I think your thinking is in the right place, in that we should always be looking and hunting for new venues to get our work out there. And I'm very open to trying it, especially if it becomes a little bit easier down the road. It's just not there for me yet, personally.
Yeah, and what Yana was saying is she heard different authors, and if I understood the question right, it was more, they were doing more novels and stuff like that. If I was doing prose, if I was doing just a straight up novel, absolutely, I would be putting the time into Amazon Kindle Direct. That would be the place to be, as far as I would be concerned.
Right.
But for graphic novels, again, in all things, it comes down to return on investment, and the investment in time was just way more than I was willing for the little bit that I was getting back in money.
Yeah, and to just put a button on Yana's great question, they also asked about how Amazon has that great, hey, if you like this, you might like that kind of a feature. No argument. That is an amazing system to tie into. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get Sheldon books on there is because I wanted anybody who bought a calendar about pugs might get a recommendation for, hey, if you like pugs and you like the visuals of pugs, you might like this pug book. And so thus far, the network effect hasn't really started to happen for me yet, but it's a slowly increasing sales on Amazon. So we'll see. But yeah, to answer your question though, Yana, that does seem like an advantageous thing to tap into. So yes.
Absolutely.
Bradley J., let's jump into the next question. This one comes from Kelly, and Kelly asks, Dave's mentioned before about the moving goalposts for success as your career develops. This can create imposter syndrome or make you feel unaccomplished. How do you maintain satisfaction after achieving your goals? Brad Geiger, let me ask you this first. Do you mind giving us a quick definition of imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is when you feel like an imposter. In other words, you're like, well, I'm a fake, I'm a phony, I'm a fraud. Everybody else is valid and genuine. They know what they're doing. They're effective at what they're doing. They're out there living their best life. I'm over here, and all it's going to take is one person who notices that I've been faking it, and it's all going to come crumbling down. That's imposter syndrome.
Right.
It's also Brad Geiger on the evening of prom. If you want a little shorthand. This is a young Brad Geiger on prom night. Is basically imposter syndrome.
I was going to say imposter syndrome, or as I like to call it, a Tuesday. Yeah.
So how do you? But I mean, she's talking about something that you brought up. How do you deal with this? How do you personally, Dave, maintain satisfaction?
Don't say it like that. Don't say, how do I maintain satisfaction?
Dave, how do you maintain satisfaction? I mean, I can tell you how I maintain satisfaction. It starts with a Barry White album.
Brad, that's you just turn it like you put your elbow on the table. Dave, how's your marriage? How's your marriage going, Dave?
Hey, is it a white wine night or a red wine night? Let me ask you that.
Well, that is the answer to how do you maintain satisfaction. A half a bottle of wine does wonders. That's it. Right. It's amazing how that greases the wheels. How do you maintain satisfaction with shifting goalposts? Well, okay, Kelly. So as you heard a week or two ago when Brad and I did the 1, 3, and 5 year goals, the idea there, I would think, is that those are not fixed goals in the sense that I'm not stuck with those goals as my be-all, end-alls. As I get up to a year, my new 1 year goals shift and they change and they modulate as needed, right? And so that's part of life. That's not surprising. But I say that to mention that part of maintaining a sense of satisfaction and that you're doing your best is to also modulate your expectations for yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think in general, happiness comes from, frankly, reasonable expectations that are happily met. So that's 1. 2, giving as much as you take in life, and that's 2. Mm-hmm. And then 3, actively working to better yourself no matter what state you're in. And so I think Brad very wisely last week had said something like, all you need to do is look back any 5-year period and be like, whoa, I'm much better than I was 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why I personally like to do Comic Lab, and I think I can speak for both of us on this, is that it's fun to give back what we know. Lord knows we are not the most perfect vessels of information.
No.
But it is fun that with a few more years on us, we can maybe help out a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or somebody else that's even our age or older, just with a little bit of tips and tricks that we might save them time on. So that is tremendously satisfying in an art career, to give back. And in general, to try to give more than you take in this life, so that's very satisfying. And frankly, as artists, you already know that as well, Kelly, that you know that when you're giving your art into the world, that's just making the art is tremendously satisfying.
Yeah.
And then I think, frankly, trying to cultivate a sense of being kind to yourself. Like, boy, I'm doing my best, and I guess I'm doing all right. I think I'm doing okay. That's how you keep the demons at bay with imposter syndrome, because Lord knows I had it just last week where I felt like, oh boy, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm no good at all. And so it legit happens to all of us all the time. And the way you do it is you go, listen, I'm doing my best. There's not much more I could be doing. I don't know who could criticize me for this. So why not be kind to myself? Don't you think, Brad?
Yeah. Well, here's another thing, because really what we're talking about is all between the ears. It's a mindset issue. And for me, my mindset has always been in the thrill of working towards a goal. My thrill has always been in the fight, in the battle, in the achieving of a goal. What do I have to do? What do I have to get into position? I got to get this thing over here. Now I've got to work up towards here. Then I've got to get this over there. Achieving the goal, when I look back on the very few goals I've actually achieved, when I look back at those moments, the moment that I achieved the goal is actually not as exciting. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I've done that. On to the next thing. I've never been that excited over a goal. Not as excited as I've been in that fight towards achieving the goal. In other words, I've always been much more focused on the journey and not the destination. The destinations have been great. They've been nice. They've been fine. I've enjoyed the destinations, but the journeys have been an adventure. And I live for those adventures. I live for the fight of that goal. So for me, I don't know the way my mindset has been that I've necessarily dealt with this, because the shifting goalpost was never a problem. It meant I had a new goal, and that meant there was a new fight, and I live for that. So
Yeah.
I think that mindset has kind of protected me a little bit in that regard, because I like the fight.
Yeah, Brad, you put that really well. It's the fight, it's not the journey. Because frankly, when Brad and I have gotten some kind of accolade or award or gotten some book out, it's lovely. And for a day you go, oh boy, look at this. This is great. Oh boy, everything's, oh boy, Brad Geiger, I'm great. And then the next day you go, well, back to it. But if you enjoy the back to it, that's the part that's super satisfying. And not to get dark for a second, but one of the reasons, Brad, I've talked about this before. One of the reasons why I think I'm not afraid of death per se is that I've liked the journey that I've taken, and I'm broadly speaking proud of all the steps that I've taken, even the failures and the mess ups, because I've liked the fight. The fight has been fun. It's not like some journey that I'm trying to get to that before I die, I need 7 awards and I need 48 books, and if I don't get that, then I failed. Like right now, if I drop dead tomorrow morning, you should go to bed knowing that I lived a satisfied life. Like I enjoyed the fight of this life and frankly the joys of this life. Maybe fight is not the right word.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the journey. That's the better way to say it. Is that so if you go to bed every night or every weekend and you go like, this was a good week, I did what I could. Did I get everything off my to-do list? No, but I did what I could and I enjoyed it and I was good to people. Then that's the way to live a satisfied life, I think.
Yeah. And it's also a way to forgive yourself for those times that you haven't quite met a goal, or the times that you came across and it was like, nah, I could have done better. I could have been better in that moment. That mindset also says, guess what? You get a chance to do this tomorrow. You know, you have a chance tomorrow. There's always going to be a tomorrow. There's always going to be another journey, another destination. And this is an ongoing thing. I think being too goal oriented can be detrimental, because the worst thing can happen often does. You reach your goal. And then what? Be journey oriented instead. Love that journey. That's where it's at. That's my opinion, at least.
I'm just sort of curious about this, Brad, and maybe there's no good answer to this, but let me ask you this. So Kelly had asked that, the goalpost move and you might feel unaccomplished even after you've accomplished something great. Have you ever had it where, and this is kind of a half-formed question, where your life feels worse after you've achieved a goal, where you're like, it's gotten markedly worse? Have you ever had that happen?
Well, in a roundabout way, yeah. When I quit my day job, because I thought, the birds were going to land on my fingers and music was going to play when I walked into my studio that next day. And really what it meant was I had to make my mortgage payment at the end of the month. And there was going to be no paycheck hitting regularly to make that happen. And immediately after that, the ad market took a huge decline, and I had to recreate everything about the webcomics business model that I had kind of cobbled together over the previous 12 years. So that was one very clear example of how reaching a goal was like, nah, maybe this isn't everything it's cracked up to be. And it was stressful, and it was a very, very difficult time. It got me to a much better place. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But yeah, that was an example of maybe in a not unrelated way, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it.
No, I think that's super related, especially, and thank you for answering that. I wasn't sure what you were going to say when I asked that question, but one of the reasons why I think that's such a helpful answer and how Brad today would deal with that same moment differently is that if you remember when I first started saying, like, how do you achieve happiness? Part of it is reasonable expectations and, frankly, low expectations. You can be very happy if you have low expectations for...
Oh, boy.
And that's not to say you don't have desires. That's not saying you don't have goals. That's not saying you don't have high aspirations. It's just your expectations are reasonable. And so you're like, oh, well, I ordered a steak, but this peanut butter jelly sandwich is fine. And then you're happy again, it's a sense of like being great. It's a gratefulness that you're cultivating. And so Brad in that moment expected when he quit his day job that it would have been like, oh, rainbows everywhere and butterflies. What his reasonable expectation would have been, and what I think he has since come to be at peace with, is that It's more time to cartoon. It's more time with family.
Yeah.
It's more time focused on the things that he loves to do. And I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, that really struck a chord with me, Dave. You can be very happy with low expectations. My wife has that needle pointed on a pillow.
And now we come full circle on how do you maintain satisfaction.
She's been very happy with low expectations.
She's just like, it takes very little in my life to... Oh, that's funny. Oh, man. Oh, God, Brad, that's funny. She's got it needle pointed. No, I guess what I'm saying is, like, nobody has a stronger drive than I do.
No, nor a stronger Sheldon.
What?
Nor a stronger Sheldon.
God damn it. I got the joke. I just didn't laugh at it.
No, I'm sorry. No one has a stronger drive. Go ahead.
What I'm saying is that, no, the difference is not what makes you work hard. Like, your expectations don't make you work hard. You should have absolutely a huge drive and huge aspirations and huge goals. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I have huge goals for my life. But I'm saying your expectations, though, if you keep them managed and reasonable, you will find happiness and satisfaction much easier to achieve in life than if you're like, Brad, if I don't have a gold car by the time I'm 50, then I failed and I should put a bullet in my head. You know, that kind of thing. Like, that kind of expectation only leads to unhappiness. So have reasonable, have sky's the limit goals and aspirations, but have reasonable expectations. And I think that's the way to achieve satisfaction to answer that question.
I think you're absolutely right. So listen, do you want to do one more question?
Not only do I want to, I'm expecting it, Brad.
Oh, well, you'd better manage your expectations. I'm only going to read half the question. So listen, our Patreon backer, Josh, writes, sometimes I see readers discussing my story or characters, and sometimes it's hard to resist the urge to correct misinterpretations. Am I right to simply lurk and observe? Or should creators be encouraged to engage with fans in discussions about their work? Dave, I've seen your Patreon backers discussing Drive, for example, and you've got some super charged up readers that are getting down to a granular level about those plot lines. Certainly some of them must be off the beaten path from time to time. Do you step in and correct them?
So this is a great question, by the way, Josh. I'm really intrigued by this. I will be honest that I have done all of the above. Literally any way you can handle this, I have tried it over 20 years of cartooning. I've stayed aloof and not answered any questions. I've been super involved and tried to course correct people and frankly made it an unhappy event for them and what they thought was a happy story, and I changed their mind about it. And then, or I've done all of the middle ground stuff in terms of lightly steering them towards what I think should be the narrative answer. Frankly, it's a kind of a play it by ear scenario, but unless it's really going to hurt their reading of it, I tend not to course correct people, I would think, Brad.
Right.
But like if they're really going off the wrong angle on this, or frankly, if their public reading of the comic is making other people start to misinterpret it, then I might course correct it, because then it's becoming a communal event, you know? The commentary itself is becoming a communal event.
It's starting to get out of control,
More than anything else, what I use misinterpretation and misreadings as is a course correction for me as an author to make sure that I'm drawing in the most clarified way that I can to get my message across that this is where the story is going. Now, there's also sometimes both intended and unintended misdirection in a story, because as an author, I'm intending the story to have misdirection in it. And sometimes there's an unintended misdirected reading that people think, oh, Dave's trying to fool us. And I'm like, no, it's just, that's what it means. I'm not trying to fool you. That is what it is. But frankly, that ambiguity is what makes it fun to read a story. If you knew what was going to be coming down the pipe on the next page for Brad's next chapter, it's not so fun to read that chapter. You know, it's why people don't like spoilers. So I let people work it out on their own. For the most part, I would think, Brad. Let's hear what you do. What do you do with this, Brad?
Well, this is a great topic because it has so many permutations. First of all, it brings us back to that topic of the I don't get it. Right? If you write something humorous and the response is I don't get it, And then the question becomes, do you explain your joke? And I always refuse to explain a joke. My own personal feeling is if I wrote a punchline and it didn't land for you, my explaining it is not going to make that joke funny. It's going to explain it, but it's not going to. But making it funny, that's two different things. And I also, having done humor for a certain amount of time, I also know that every joke has a certain percentage built in of I don't get it's in your audience. There's going to be the best punchline that Chris Rock or George Carlin or any of those folks, the best punchline they ever delivered had a certain number of people in the audience going, I don't get it. So I don't get caught up in that's a singular and momentary failure. I failed with that one audience member on that one occasion, and I don't get too wrapped up in I don't get it. But bigger than that, when it comes to people, taking a look at your storyline and where is this going and so on and so forth, I take the opinion that misunderstandings and mistaken assumptions are a part of the reading experience. In other words, that's part of the mystery that unfolds. If it was all cut and dried, like Dave said, it wouldn't be a very interesting reading experience. And I don't want to rob my readers of that moment of, oh, geez, I thought it was going this way, and now it's going that way. That's something that I want them to have. Now, if it's something that you can see as it's coming through that, oh, geez, I've kind of written this scene ambiguously and a certain number of my readers are interpreting it in a way that's a fair interpretation, but it's going to screw things up. Well, that's an indication that you might need to go in and either clean that up or do a little storytelling that ties up that loose end and clarifies. But in general, I try to stay as far away from discussions of my work as possible, unless it's like the very surface level stuff. Hey, I like that strip, or I like that comic. Hey, that's great. Thank you so much. But like, I find people messaging me on Twitter, asking me very, very super specific questions about stuff in the Evil Inc. universe that has never even happened yet and might never happen. And I stay as far away from that as possible because anything that I say can and will be used against me. How does the Evil Inc. Universe handle an anti-hero such as the Punisher? I'm not answering that question. It's never come up in Evil Inc. Really to a significant portion. And if it does, my treatment of that is going to be based on what's best for the story, not based on what I said to this person on Twitter yesterday. Right. So I try to avoid all of that. I try to put the work out, let the work speak for itself. And I have minimal engagement after that. And sometimes that's to my detriment, even on Patreon, where I try to be as active as I possibly can because I really want to give positive reinforcement to that. Sometimes my natural philosophy is just to say, no, I'm going to let that comment sit. I'm not going to get involved in that.
Yeah, in a way, Brad, don't you feel like it's like, I'll let you figure it out? Like you may not get it now, you may not get it a month from now, but hopefully by the end of the story, you'll have figured it out.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's a part of the enjoyment of a story, is figuring it out.
And part of it is, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for bringing up explaining a joke, because I forgot that entire chunk of explainers exists in the world, because this question had mainly focused on plot. But boy, explaining a joke is possibly the worst thing you can do, because someone had a really good metaphor once. It's like explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You can figure out how the frog works, but now you've got a dead frog.
Yeah.
And that's what explaining a joke is. Like, I can give you all the mechanics of what the joke should have delivered for you, but if in explaining it, it's not going to make you happy. It's not going to make me happy. We're just going to end up with a dead joke. So, I don't explain jokes. Usually when, if let's say Greg comes to me and goes, "Hey, Dave, boy, I just did not get today's joke. I don't know what happened, but I just did not get it." I go, "You know what, Greg? No worries. I'll try you again tomorrow."
Yeah.
And I don't even try to explain it. I'm like, no worries. And in fact, if the tone is of a certain kind of tone, I'll just take the blame on me. I'll say, "Well, that means that I didn't do my job as a cartoonist. I'm sorry about that, Greg." That kind of thing.
I've done both of those, and they're I swear by them. I swear, because you make it clear in that moment too that you're not going to explain it. And if somebody else wants to step in and monkey around with that, that's fine. But I'm not going to explain a joke. And the people talking have to understand that and again, I take this very personal. The more they pushed me on it, the more I react like you're trying to rub my nose in it. And I'm like, no. The more you push me, the more I'm like, nope, never going to do it. Now it's become a power struggle, and I am not going to lose that.
Now listen, but here's a different approach that I take. If I get 40 emails saying, "Oh, man, Dave, I did not get today's cartoon," then I genuinely have to take a moment of self-reflection and go, "What did I do wrong here? Like I did clearly, I communicated something wrong here. Oh, I see. The setup is a little bit, it's a little ambiguous, or the punchline doesn't really deliver, or I needed another key word here to explain this a little bit better." And so, if you do get a lot of "I don't get it," that's your moment, not publicly, but as a private self-reflection, to go like, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? Yeah. But you don't need to share that publicly, because it frankly just ruins the experience and kind of reveals the little man behind the curtain of Wizard of Oz there.
It comes back to that old saying in webcomics: you never listen to a reader, but you always listen to your readers.
Ooh, I never heard that. That's a good phrase.
Yeah, I just made that up. But it's true. You never listen to a reader, but you always listen to your readers.
Yeah, that's really true. Good point. And then so the one thing that I do I want to expand on a little bit. One of the things that I frankly offer to patrons of Drive over at patreon.com/drive is that, unlike on my regular site where I don't really comment on the strip of the day or the storyline of the moment at all, on Patreon, I will go in depth on answers of people like, why would this happen in the galaxy? Or why did the Empire do this? And frankly, it's both fun for me as a writing exercise and valuable for the true patrons, the true fans of Drive, to see the deep dives as to why the machinations of why the Empire does X, Y, Z, or why this alien race evolved this way. Stuff that doesn't impact the story per se, but it's just fun to have the background of. It's like if you could pull Frank Herbert aside and ask him a question about Dune, or pull J.R. Tolkien aside and ask him a question about Lord of the Rings, it'd be fun to get some of this background detail that you don't need to know to enjoy why Frodo is going to throw the ring in, but it's fun to know the machinations of how the ring might have been made in the volcano there, that kind of thing. So I do provide that kind of stuff, and there are, in the course of those conversations, some course corrections or misreadings or misinterpretations, but it's more like in a friendly community sense than in a, no, you're reading it wrong, this is the way to read it, that kind of thing.
Now, if you're going to do it right.
Now, have you ever had this, Brad? Let's be humble as authors for a moment. I have had people misread some of my comics, but their misreading has been like, oh, that's a better version than what I had. Oh, that's a much deeper meaning than I had intended. But yes, that's the new meaning.
That's exactly what I intended.
Yep. I did mean that to be a parallel of World War I. You're right. Yes, I did.
That's like Pee Wee Herman getting back on his bike and saying, I meant to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I did not expect today to have a Pee Wee Herman reference. That's great.
Well, did you expect this? What I'm going to say next? You've been listening. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I am flabbergasted that that's what happened, because your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com, and get ready for this, you probably didn't expect it, the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
Oh, yeah, well, then you should probably expect this, that your other host has been Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
Well, the most unexpected thing of the day is that our wonderful sponsors are over at Wacom at wacom.com. Makers of Fantastics, Antiques, and Into Us. We thank them again for sponsoring the show. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes was edited by the ever-delightful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions. No surprise here over at www.woodsong.media.
And least surprising of all, Comics Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we're going to say that twice. Patreon.com/Comic Lab. Now listen, Dave, first you put the berry white on, and then you uncork the bottle. Now you
hold on. My pen ran out. Hold on. Let me write this down.
Okay.
Yeah, then I uncork the bottle. Okay, berry white.
Uncork you should have some scented candles.
Scented candles, okay.
I've stood next to you a few times. Get extra strength. And you're
like, you know what? In fact, I think we've zeroed in on your problem.
Actually. Does Febreze make a candle? Does
Febreze make a candle? Is there a flea and tick spray that comes in a human soap form?